Ladies and gentlemen, when Magnus Carlsen plays chess, we all watch. We dissect, we learn, we laugh, we cry if he loses, we experience a wide range of emotions. And in today's video, I'm going to be covering several of the games that he played just a couple of days ago at the AI Cup. It's part of the Champions Chess Tour, and it was an epic final match where we got to see multiple layers of Magnus's chess personality. We saw ups, we saw downs. It was a back-and-forth affair, and his opponent was Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, who is the famed, accomplished, ultra-successful French chess player. And that's about all I have to say. Sit back, relax, and enjoy this one-way ticket to Oslo, Norway, or Lyon, France. And I just want to say, MVL has a great profile picture. I don't know if you can see that. That is him on a shark. Sensational. Magnus begins with pawn to e4. MVL is a Sicilian defense player, and if there's an opening that he plays, it is the Najdorf. And you gotta love this, because MVL, literally, his middle name is Najdorf. Like, you can't make this stuff up. His name is Maxime Najdorf Vachier-Lagrave. That's not actually his name. But Magnus goes directly into his point of strength, which is amazing. You love to see that. First game, we just go straight into his opening. Magnus plays bishop e3. Now MVL plays this funny move, knight to g4. And many games here have actually gone back and forth. White is like, no, I want to put my bishop there. And Black's like, haha, I want to make a draw. And you're like, nee, nee. But that doesn't happen in this game, because after the knight goes back, Magnus plays f3. So Magnus plays the f3 Najdorf, not the bishop to e3 Najdorf, but he still puts his bishop there and his queen. And this setup clearly shows that White is going to castle queenside, which he will do in a moment. First, he plays pawn to g4. This f3 pawn is kind of like a trampoline. It's like a springboard for these pawns. I can't draw arrows. The pawns are going to go that way, kicking out the knight, and potentially landing in front of the king if it castles over here. But MVL's got plans of his own with b4. He stops Magnus from advancing with h6. Magnus castles long. Knight moves to the center because you can't play f4. I take this. You can't play g5. You can, but then I would just take, and you're not going to break through anyway successfully there. Magnus plays pawn to b3, temporarily slowing down the queenside, and reroutes his knight backwards via b2. Very obscure stuff. Now MVL, sensing the retreating, sensing Magnus already down 3.5 minutes, plays d5, trying to take over the initiative. Magnus attacks the knight in the center of the board. MVL sacrifices the knight, ruining White's pawn structure, barreling into the position, and now a very cool, calm, collected rook to g8. And this is one thing you gotta love about Sicilian defense players, about, you know, Maxime in particular. He's not afraid to part with material. Magnus's knight is back here. These pieces are all a bit loose, and without pawns in White's position, White's not going to be able to attack Black. Black, meanwhile, has very potent and powerful and sexy attacking possibilities. Well, here we go. And now in this position, Magnus sacrifices his queen. Queen takes e4. Look at that. Oh my goodness. Gives up the queen entirely, grabs the bishop, and this is hit. Various discovered attacking possibilities open in the future. The knight is going to come in as well. So MVL decides to sack the queen back. Amazing. He could have played queen e7, but then Magnus would have gone bishop to e2 and just slowly improved his position as this knight stands in the territory. And if you play rook to d8, I got bad news. I take this pawn and I come right back, and I'm going to get that material. So very difficult position. MVL just says, all right, let's go to an endgame. I've got a rook, you've got a knight and a bishop, I've got an extra 2 pawns. And if you know anything about Magnus Carlsen, you know this man in an endgame, it doesn't matter if it's theoretical, doesn't matter if it's imbalanced, he's going to find a way. He gets the 2 bishops versus the rook, which is a borderline winning advantage. It just comes down to the pawns. MVL advances his 2 f-pawns. MVL has 3 passed pawns. Every one of these pawns is eligible to become a queen, but one is gone. You can't play rook h8 because I would play discovered check and then I would win your rook. So rook g2. Look at MVL bullying these bishops, but Magnus is too strong. And he slowly, methodically removes all of MVL's pawns, and just these remain, and they're just not good enough. f2, a square away from queening. Bishop c3 check. Rook centralizes. And Magnus is ready to give up his bishop and get that pawn. If you go here, after take, rook e4, 3 pawns are more than enough to win this endgame for white. So in this position, we have rook e1, and Magnus, as always, doing it in style. The bishop is going to stop the pawns. Rook c4 sacrifices this, and he takes, and MVL resigns. Just in the nick of time, pawn is about to queen, this pawn is about to queen. You have to play rook to e2, I push. By the time you bring your king, c7, king g2, it's over. Magnus wins an incredible first game, sacrificing his queen, sending it down into a super imbalanced endgame, vintage Magnesian school of chess. Oh, I have a back cramp. You ever sleep badly? And like your whole body just is sore? Oh, terrible. But this is not going to be a video where Magnus just steamrolls his opponent. This is going to be a video where his opponent fights back. Maxime came to play. He was not going to get blown out in 3-4 games. He came to play. Magnus plays a Taimanov Sicilian, a 4-knight Sicilian with knight f6 and knight c6. Maxime plays take, plays e5, and puts the knight on d6 and says, all right, I have 2 bishops. I have a starting setup. Let's go, Magnus. Do your worst. Magnus plays pawn to c5, activating his light-squared bishop. Maxime kicks the knight out of the center of the board and plays pawn to a3, throwing it backwards. Now bishop to e3 targets the c5 pawn. Magnus counterattacks the pawn on b2 because if you take, the side over here is going to get weak. Let's defend that. Magnus eyeing it up again. Maxime calls the bluff. Says, I don't believe you. Bishop a8. Opening up the pressure over here. Sealing it shut with bishop to b4. Now queen e5 check played by Magnus Carlsen, hitting all sorts of things. But bishop e2, he grabs the bishop, he plays bishop takes g2, stopping MVL from castling. Rook g1 is nice, but you know what else is nice? Rook to a5. Utilizing that cluster of pawns that Magnus allowed to happen, c5 looking mighty juicy, b5 taking that, marching the pawns through, and then I come back for the bishop. Bishop f3 with pressure here, but all it is pressure because rook takes g7. This is crazy. This pawn is sealing shut the king's escape off the back rank. There's pressure on all the pawns. The position is super complicated, and MVL's down nearly 5 minutes on the clock. Bishop e2, queen b1 check, and it looks like Magnus is going to go to town on these pawns. Queen takes b2. I mean, my goodness, it is looking really, really nice. Rook to g5. What a move by MVL. That's mate. That is not an exaggeration. That is a mate, and the king cannot castle. So in this position, queen takes b4 check played by Magnus. The king slides out to safety. Another pawn falls. He has won all of Maxime's pawns. Maxime is down 2 pawns. Rook f8. And in this position, Maxime finds a move that completely turns the game around. It looks like white has to go here, but then queen e4 hits this and this. That was Magnus's idea. And it looks like there is no way into this king. Well, in this position, Maxime sacrificed the rook! Rook takes f7. That is a wicked move. Are you kidding me? If you take with the king, this is mate? It's just mate. It's mate on g7, on e7. And if you take with this rook, check here, queen h5. Oh my god. This is one of the most disrespectful rook sacrifices I've ever seen in my life. It's directly in Magnus's face. So Magnus goes here, rook g7. He still doesn't move the rook. Check. And now he has to lose the queen to not get mated. This is now the position. What a ridiculous endgame. This pawn that landed there on move 10 is still the anchor of white's position. And it is impossible to get rid of. Because I always have check and I can go defend and I can sneak it on other sides. Check, 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 check. MVL giving many checks, and now he picks up the d7 pawn. Now it's now or never for Magnus. He's either going to defend himself or he's going to lose. He's losing all of his pawns. He can't get that other one because it's going to be checked no matter what. And at some point, MVL is going to start moving his pawns as well. But here comes Magnus. Oh my goodness, bolting down the board. MVL with 50 seconds on the clock. The pawn is a square away from queening. Queen b7 check. King to a4. Queen to b2. And in this position, something insane happened. In this position, Magnus Carlsen needed to play a1 because he would have deflected the queen and the king would have ran to safety. Instead, he went here. And now the king marched forward, threatening the rook and threatening mate. Magnus Carlsen missed checkmate in 1. In this position, Magnus's rook is hanging, and that's a checkmate. So he played rook to b6 with the idea if king takes, rook b8, check, and if queen takes, rook c8 check, and a1 queen potentially in the future. But instead, queen takes a2. With 2 minutes nearly on the clock, Magnus must have realized at this point that king c5 is losing. His original idea had been to probably play rook to b6. But that's mate. And MVL has just struck back. Wow. That is absolutely insane. The white king and white queen hunt down the king to the edge of the board, stop the pass pawn, and queen a2 is checkmate. It's all square. So we keep moving. Now, the way it works is the players play a final in a double elimination. They play a final. Magnus Carlsen won the first time they played. Maxime went to the loser's bracket, the consolation bracket. He won it. So he got back into a grand final match versus Magnus. So all Magnus has to do is bury MVL for a second time, and he's going to win the entire thing. Here we go. Maxime, Queen's Gambit accepted. Ooh, interesting. And he plays a very solid line, Magnus. And this is one of the main lines with e6, a6, and pawn to c5. Plays a4. It's a big move. It stops b5, but it gives up the b4 square. And you best believe that at a certain moment, here comes the black knight to the b4 square. The bishop is going to go to b7, and that d5 square is going to be very much locked down. Magnus takes on f6, removing the knight from existence, and plays rook a3 with a very simple idea. He just wants to checkmate his opponent. He's going to put his rook over there. Now MVL gives up a pawn. Pawn to b5. It's a big move. Pawn to b5, but everything in white's position is designed to stop that. Take, bishop takes. Queen d5. Mate is threatened. But why would you threaten mate if rook g3 is possible, defending mate and counterattacking your king? Clearly, Magnus didn't like this move because he didn't play it. I don't know why he didn't like it, and I'm not going to Instagram message him about it. Knight f3, rook c8, take. So Maxime is just down a pawn, like a pure pawn. Magnus just has this pawn. Now Magnus is going to demonstrate how to overtake his opponent from this position and win the game. Bishop d2. Queen f1. Let's enter the Magnesian school of chess. Bishop a4, he forces a rook trade. Couple of moves later, removes that from the game and goes to this endgame and plays bishop to d6, take, and take. But MVL does get this pawn. So it's 4-4, but Magnus definitely has the better chances because this is an outside pass pawn. b4. And now he's just going to do this and maybe play bishop g3 or bishop c5. Maxime, though, fighting back, brings his king. Walks the king to d7, anticipating the arrival of the b pawn. Bishop b4. But check, king d6. Wait a minute. What's happening here? The king's touching the pawn. Suddenly, you start realizing Maxime has outplayed Magnus for a second game. Magnus, at this point, has to just bail out. I don't even know how to bail out. You've got to probably lose the b-pawn, keep the bishop, and try to draw this endgame with a bad cluster. But Magnus goes here, chucks the f2 pawn, and plays f5. He's trying to mobilize. He's trying to simplify the game down to a draw by force, but he's down 2 pawns. Bishop c3, and his king infiltrates, gets to f7, but here comes Maxime. You can win all of my pawns, but here comes Maxime. Bishop b6, bishop g5, and the way that black is going to try to win this is to get this bishop off of this diagonal. Magnus blocks, the king arrives. Now if the bishop goes out that way to this diagonal, the bishop seals it off, so the bishop's got to go here, but now the bishop is deflected, and if bishop to h4, which still obviously can claim a draw, then Maxime will win by bringing the bishop around. He's going to play the bishop to e1, and then we're going to get out of there, and then he's going to promote. So something like bishop here, king g6, bishop e1, and that's the end of the game. It's the end of the game because the second the bishop sidesteps, f2. Bishop d2, and you can comfortably say here, my friends, Maxime just beat the best endgame player in the world down a pawn in an endgame. Magnus just completely underestimated the defenses. You know, he could have played knight e5, but the opposite colored bishop endgame is a draw, which is why he didn't do this. He just didn't want to go to the opposite colored bishop endgame, which makes a lot of sense. So instead, he went to the same colored bishop endgame, trying to win it in, you know, equal style. No, by pawns, but he lost. He straight up lost. So Maxime now is winning the grand final. But, you know, that's not the end of Magnus. Magnus goes back to a Queen's Gambit accepted, and this was a crazy game. MVL allowed Magnus to have a fat boy center over here, trading off his knight. Look at this position. I mean, just visually, White's position is stunning. Big center, well supported. Black has a weird cluster on the queen side that can be exploited potentially with a4 and these types of things. And that's exactly what Magnus does. And he puts that big pawn in the center, sealing out the light squared bishop f4. Oh my goodness. The position literally cannot look any better. You put the bishop here, you put the queen here, you get the rook lift to h3. Knight e4, knight d6 is $1 million knight. Knight g5 is $1 million knight. Maxime plays f5, and Magnus just marches him down the board. I mean, he goes Strickland Adesanya on him, just walking him down in the octagon. And Black's position is in a world of trouble here. You knew that Magnus was going to come alive at some point. You knew that he's not going to be losing these games back-to-back. Needed some hydration. Got a little liquid IV in here as well. Some electrolytes, you know how it is. Liquid IV, holler at your boy. We like those sponsors. Take, and take. For those of you keenly watching, you realize that MVL just won a pawn. For those of you also keenly watching, you know that doesn't mean anything because the knight is struggling to get into the game. White has a pass pawn that's defended. This bishop is stuck. And Magnus just goes for it. Pawn to g4. Just goes for it. Absolutely goes for it. MVL ducks under the shot. Oh my goodness. Look, that is a great move. Just giving up the pawn to activate the bishop, just to give White a bit of a headache. Give him the pawn back. Bishop takes d4, but that could come with its own headache. But let's not forget, here comes Black's knight and all of this and this. And knight to e6, and the position's still very complicated. Take. The king is open. Oh my goodness. Maxime on the ropes. The king is about to be absolutely bludgeoned. He doesn't even take back. He plays knight into d3. That is a ridiculous move, trying to cut all the circulation of the white position. Magnus says, you can't even have my f-pawn now. Magnus now has two passed pawns that are 2 and 3 squares away from promotion, and they are all defending each other, and they are all knocking on the door of the king. Oh, what a masterful attacking game. Here comes MVL trying to throw some desperate things on the queen side. Bishop g4 hits the queen. But now we see why MVL opened up the diagonal, because there's checkmate, but he doesn't get checkmated. Magnus removes the bishop and slowly, methodically, pawn to f5, and the game is over. The game is over. You take with a pawn. I'm going to get in with my queen. I'm going to zip around to the other side. The bishop guards the rook, which is going to get the... Oh, my goodness. What a game. You go back a couple of moves. Look at Magnus. 1 minute versus like 5. He had 2 versus 5, and then he had 1 versus 3, and just perfectly executed game. MVL captures. And now a winning idea here is queen g3 and rook f5. Because, for example, if the black king goes to h8... you just start opening up this diagonal. If the black king goes to f7, you actually zip around, and if rook g8, you have e6 check. The king is deflected from the rook, and if queen takes, you get in, it's check, and you win. But Magnus is the best endgame player of all time, so he goes for an endgame. But is this endgame winning? I mean... Of course, Magnus has check and 2-pass pawns. But suddenly, MVL is defending on the light squares. He has a pass pawn of his own, and that pass pawn is moving. White's pawns are not moving. And all of a sudden, that pass pawn is about to queen. Bishop b2, e6, and the players... just absolutely obliterate each other's pawns and agree to a draw. Magnus Carlsen basically played an absolutely flawless attacking game, and right here sensed he couldn't find a win exactly with queen g3 with the rook counterplay, so he decided to go for an endgame, and I guess just in a moment of madness grossly misevaluated it, and black defended perfectly. Maxime Vachier-Lagrave will not go down. He will not go down without a fight. And he does not lose this game. He saves this game. We see Magnus saving games like this. We don't see people saving games like this against Magnus. And Magnus lost the final. He lost the final. Now remember, he won the first final. So this is the grand finale. And now in double elimination format, what happens is MVL won a match, Magnus won a match, they play a 2-game mini-match, and that decided the whole thing. So Maxime fights his way back, gets revenge against Magnus, but now it's time for Magnus to end this run. We have yet another Queen's Gambit accepted. DC. The positions might all be fusing into one another. Please do not worry. Another one of these games where the big center happens. And my friends, you are not going to have to wait for excitement in this one, because after knight d4, bishop c7 attacking his queen, you may realize that queen is trapped. You may also not be realizing what's even happening on the board because you're just watching and you're just enjoying the commentary and the banter and the memes and the dreams and the schemes. But in this position, if Magnus moves his queen to e7, black will play bishop takes e5 and also rook e8. So Magnus... sacrifices the queen. He takes the bishop. Bishop takes d6. Rook takes d6. And all of this has been played before. As you can see, Magnus is not thinking. 15 minutes and 34 seconds on the clock. He just gave up a queen for 2 bishops. That's the count. Leon Beast is up 3 points of material. But that's falling. The king will be weak, and Magnus will just simply have more pieces. Pawn to c6 completely prevents black from developing anything. And look at this position. Black has no moves. This is Magnesian right here. Rook d8 is coming. He's going to double up in a moment. I mean, the position is completely hopeless. Black can't move a single piece. But it's been that type of match, and Maxime has come to fight. He is not just going to get steamrolled here by Magnus. He is going to fight. He has absolutely no respect whatsoever. He plays knight bd7. He says, all right, I can't move anything. Take my knight. Magnus says, yeah, I will. Now knight takes d7. Let's trade some pieces. Look at this. We got everything staring at everything. You trade too much. I can't even play rook d7, but I would play queen c4 check. You trade too much, you're going to lose. Queen is very powerful. Knight c6. Just getting out of the way. Bishop comes back. Now it's time for MVL. Rook d1. Pieces on the back rank. King slides out of the way of the bishop. Magnus just going for it. Look at this. g4. I mean, just how is Maxime going to stop this attack? 3 of his 4 pieces are stuck on the back rank. The knight patrols the rooks. The knight can't move out this way. The bishops are powerful and staring at everything. Maxim's just got to make moves. He's also down 6 minutes on the clock. Queen f6, bishop d4. Maxim just takes on h4. He takes on h4 because desperate times call for desperate measures. Bishop takes e6 is a ridiculous move because the knight can't take the bishop because that's a fork. So Maxim has to get away with his queen. But now the bishop goes to d5. Visually, look how absurd this position is. Magnus just has 2 bishops for a queen, but because he has so many pieces, strength in numbers. Maxim offers up a rook. He offers up a rook because just by getting another piece off of the position, he has a chance. But g5 is coming. Magnus says, I don't want the rook. g5, let's go. And now MVL says, you should have taken my rook when you had a chance because you're leaving me with too many pieces. Rook c8. Magnus plays rook c6. But you see, he spent nearly 3 minutes on that move. He didn't like something. Take, h takes g5. A couple of moves ago, Magnus played this move g5 to open up black's king. But suddenly the king is open, but 1 rook for white is not going to cut it. Now here comes black's second rook. And you left my queen there. You allowed the queen to get into the territory. When you had all the pieces, you were not scared. But now I'm going to win your pawns. And let me tell you something right now. Strength in numbers, but not when those pieces are isolated on outskirts of the board. Knight to d4. Remember that pawn, Magnus, that you gave me? Remember that pawn? Now I'm using it against you. I'm prying apart your position. You can't take the bishop, though, because rook h1 is mate. Ridiculous. The bishop stops the escape of the king. Queen h5 and then rook h5. So, rook d8. Rook f1. Queen g2, rook f5. Now here comes rook h5. Pawn to g6. Rook to f6, getting closer. All the pawns have fallen, and Magnus has no more anchors of pieces. Knight f3. He brings the bishop back. If you take, I have rook f7. But guess what? So what? The black king courageously marches up to h5. And my friends, this is absolutely maddening. Magnus Carlsen loses the knight on f3, has to take the queen, and Maxim is going to calmly push this pawn and slide back to stop Magnus from queening, and that is exactly what happens. Maxim Vachier-Lagrave just defeats Magnus again with the black pieces in an insane game, leaving Magnus no choice but to save it in the final game of the match. Or will Maxim completely change the narrative of this video and win it all? Maxim plays into an open Sicilian, plays c4, a Marocci-style formation, puts all these pawns forward. Magnus has to win with black. Bishop e3. Knight c2 looking to trade some pieces because the less pieces you have, the less winning chances you have, and white wants to play e5. Queen d2. Rook e1. Magnus throws in the knight. Forces a trade. MVL seals the center. The knights and the queen are now disconnected. The bishop has opened up possibilities of sacrifice. The knight can't return home. Knight e4, knight d6, also a possibility. The queen slides out of the way of the pin. The knight goes there. Rook d1 looking to fight back. Let's trade off the knights and the knight goes to the center. Knight f5, looking to put the knight on e3. Here comes rook f3. Maxim is ready with this and g4. Just so you understand how close this game is to being over, if rook h3 and g4 happen, knight f6 check is also possible here. Pawn takes and queen h5, but just to like g4 and all of this is just absolutely brutal. So we have take, and knight e3. And in this position, not needing to do anything overly complicated, Maxim says it's time to bury. I was going to say the world champion, but he's not. But the best player, probably of all time. Bishop takes h7 check. The Greek gift sacrifice from a Frenchman to a Norwegian. Rook h3 check. The elevator door slides open and out comes the queen. That's mate. Now it's a 50-50. Magnus has to move his f-pawn to get an escape route for his king. You're seeing -2 because according to Stockfish, one of these moves is winning and one of them is a draw. Magnus Carlsen spends 5 seconds on this move and plays the wrong one. Apparently, you had to play f6. Queen h7, king f7. And now if rook h6, there's a multitude of moves, but rook takes here is actually just winning. Knight takes rook is actually just winning because, for example, rook f6, king e8, queen g6, you have rook f7, apparently. Also, if f6, king h7, rook g3 threatening this, the knight can come back to f5. This is the key idea, defending this and this. But when you play f5, you now no longer have this move. So after this, rook g3, there is rook g8. But rook h6, black can now no longer take this. Originally, there was a pawn on f6, which stopped the attack over here. But now you cannot go there because of this. Friendly reminder, when the pawn was on f6, check here, rook h6, knight d1, there is no mate. Magnus had to play the right move. He had 5 seconds spent on this moment. One is probably winning, and the other, my friends, not good enough. Pawn to f5 played, the attack roars forward, and now Magnus can't take this or this. Rook f6 is a threat, queen g6 is a threat. You can't stop the attack. The game will end in a draw, and yet, Magnus takes this pawn. And the game does not end in a draw because Maxime finds check here, and he doesn't take anything else with a check. Queen takes g7. He threatens mate, and if the rook takes, pawn takes, mate, and a queen is coming. 2-0. Maxime Vachier-Lagrave just shocked the absolute world of chess. Came back in a final against Magnus Carlsen and didn't beat him once, but beat him twice. He won 2 matches against Magnus Carlsen in one day. And he wins the AI Cup, and he qualifies to the grand finale in Toronto, Canada, which will happen in December. More on that later. Incredible. Incredible stuff. Not always what you expect in a Magnus video. Someone came to fight today, and his name was Maxime Naidorf Vachier-Lagrave. Have a good weekend if you're watching this on Saturday, and get out of here.